Welcome to another edition of the Rant Forum. I am your host, Luca Jubino. I will try to broadcast at least 2 times a week, and as always, our Gmail address is at the bottom of the screen. You can write to that with questions, comments, suggestions, critique, anything that you think is valid to improve this show, or even things that you may disagree with. A couple things that recently happened. Of course, we did the first webcast. People came and wrote, and surprisingly in larger numbers than I expected, which is great. So I want to get to a few of these questions of people, you, the viewer, that have actually watched the show and written in. Ryan M., and this is what he writes: the media portrays so much political agenda. Tell the kids to get an education, stay in school, still follow your dreams, stand up for what you believe, and yet at the same time, don't burn your city to the ground or cause riots. That one voice can be heard. Let's unite, not make a division between race, class, or even religion. That it's okay to believe in what you want, yet at the same time, do it the right way. And the emphasis is on education, which he writes again. This takes me back to an old quote that I read, one of the best books that I've ever written, actually, by Friedrich Nietzsche. And he was a German philosopher, lived in the late 1880s, I believe, when his last work was published. And one of the quotes that he made is, the fastest way to corrupt a society is to hold and teach those to hold in higher regard those who think alike rather than those that think differently. And so when 90% of people say one thing is great, I always have to look to the other 10% and think what they are thinking, if they are thinking at all. But let's get back to the education comment. Personal experience, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Facts and figures, they don't mean much to me because, quite honestly, our opinion is based not just on facts and figures of other people. Our opinion is based on what we live, what we see every day, things that we've lived through, and personal experiences. And what I know for a fact, and my family immigrated to the United States in the 1980s, the mid to late 1980s, is that at that time, I had known people that came off the boat, or the sayings came off the boat, but they came off of an airplane, obviously. And they got a job somewhere at General Motors, Ford, some other places, not knowing the language well. And so, essentially what they did, and it's the majority of Eastern Europeans that I knew, is they never really learned English, but they forgot Polish. And so the last 5-10 years of their life, they grunted. Now, as humorous as that may be, because it is, and it's even more humorous when you try to talk to them around the holidays, they were able to come to this country, solidify a job, work hard, work 60, 70 hours a week, whatever they could, and be able to pay for their kids' educations. And one family in particular that I'm speaking of was able to pay for all 3 of their kids' educations. I think 2 of the kids got a master's degree, and one of them is still working on her PhD. But the sad fact of the matter is that their father, who was an immigrant to this country, who got off of an airplane, who was able to waltz into a job and solidify a job and pay for his family, and not just pay for their homes, but I mean, they were doing well. They had properties up north. People in Michigan buy cabins, they go in other areas, little vacation spots that they would go to, 10 or 12 huts around an area, waterfront property on Lake Michigan. They're able to pay for their kids' cars. Their kids had used cars, but new used cars every 4 to 6 months, and their parents were able to flip those and make money as well. Today, their children, the children of these immigrants, have gone through and speak English perfectly, much better than I do, because English is actually the 5th language that I've learned. So, of course, you're going to have a bit of an accent, and it's going to be choppy at times, but it is what it is. Today, their kids, having finished a master's degree, having finished a double master's degree, working for their PhD, cannot solidify a job comparable to their parents who came here not speaking the language. They can't. They are worried just as much as everyone else on how many kids they're able to have, how they're going to be able to pay back student loans, how they're going to be able to take care of other things in the future. So I ask you, what's happened? I don't believe at all that America has gotten that lazy. I don't think that, of course there are lazy Americans, I'm not taking that away from people. There's lazy people everywhere. There's people that are never going to want to work, and it doesn't matter what kind of job you'd give them, they wouldn't do a good job at it. That's just the way of things. But I have to wonder to myself, when you grow up in that sort of dynamic, that sort of family, and that sort of setup, when education is the one thing that you're looking for and you're looking after, how does that affect all the other aspects of your life? And I've talked to several people, and what I am saying is the American dream has in many ways become the American hindrance. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. When I was 22 years old in 2002, I was already looking into buying a house in the Detroit metropolitan area. The house was probably 3-bedroom home, 2-story, $174,000. This was before September 11th. I was going to school for aircraft maintenance. I was looking at jobs that were starting pay $38 an hour, and I was just busting my tail being able to go through it. I would work 40 plus hours a week. Sometimes I'd go into work on a Friday and sleep a little bit because I was an aircraft fueler. So I could sleep in the fuel trucks. If somebody called in, I would drive out, fuel up their airplane, and move along. And sometimes I wouldn't get out until Sunday morning. And I worked a day and a half out of a 2-day weekend if I could. I'd go home for 8 to 10 hours. I'd be tired. I'd collapse in the door. But I knew what I was working for. I felt like I knew what I was working for. I was working for the house. I was working for the dream, the idea of independence, the idea of having a home, having a place that you can invite people to, having the fantasy of inviting family over and having dinner around here. That was the driving force between a lot of things. And of course, your own ambition drives things also. But today I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the fact that I chose not to buy that house. I'm thankful for the fact that I didn't take out a loan on that house. I'm thankful for the fact that I didn't set myself up to a 20 to 30 year prison sentence. It's one thing when a government, a country, a political agenda puts somebody in prison and holds them there for 10 to 15 to 20 years. It's another thing when you put yourself there and hold yourself there, but how would you know any better when everybody's doing the same thing you are? For the longest time, people on American television, Alan Greenspan even released a commercial saying essentially borrow against your house. It's a wonderful idea. You know, you buy your house for $250,000. It's worth $300,000 now 2 or 3 years later. You can borrow that money, borrow an extra 50 grand, because guess what? In another 3 to 4 to 5 years, it's going to be worth $500,000. Now, having not been a homeowner at that time, I looked back and I'm thinking to myself, damn, I'm 22, 23 years old. There's no way in hell I'm ever going to be able to buy a house unless either they start paying aircraft maintenance technicians, you know, $85 an hour and work as much overtime as you'd like. So essentially what people did is they took out $50,000 loans, $100,000 loans, $150,000 loans, and what they did is they went back into their homes. They went back into their homes, they refinished the basement, they put a pool table in, they put a pool in the backyard, they built a nice deck, they took a family vacation to Florida, they went to Aruba, they went to Puerto Vallarta, wherever they could go to, and then everything dropped. And then the balloon payments started. I know, matter of fact, 3 people that worked in real estate, and they lost their homes. Now, if somebody working in real estate loses their home, it's the equivalent of a car dealer buying a car and paying 2 times more of what it's worth. Either it tells you that the person doesn't know their job, which I would like to think if they had been working in this industry for 10 to 15 years, they did, or that the system is set up and designed for you to fail. Now, even today, you can have people that have 20 or 30-year mortgages, and I've spoken to many people randomly throughout the years, and I ask them, do you think that you are going to have the same job in 20 to 30 years? And that's when things get shaky in their minds. Now, they still have the payment. They still have the balloon payment. They still have the regular payment that's hovering above their head. And now raise a family on that and hopefully take a vacation and expand your view and your vision of things in the world. But I haven't met one yet that thought he'd be working the same job, even within the same company, in 20 to 30 years. Because, quite honestly, it's unrealistic. It's really not what happens in the United States today. And it hasn't been happening here for a while. I don't completely misunderstand the younger generation, the generation that the older generation, the boomerang generation, for example, now the people that have gone off to college, gotten their educations, incurred $120,000 to $150,000 worth of school debt, many of which can't pay it back. I have a good friend, double master's degree. Last year he made $3,750. How is that payment plan going to work out? Hopefully they can come through and they can extend his life so he can be paying on it for the next 400 years. And at interest rates the way that they have them, I'm not even sure with minimal payments if he would be able to pay that off even to that date. So either we start living as long as Moses and start working as long as Moses, 600, 700 years, whatever it's written in the Bible that he lived, to be able to pay these loans off, or we get smart and more intelligent about what we're doing, or we ask for a change. So yeah, there is a political agenda in the news, going back to Ryan M's question. Telling the kids to get an education, I think an education is a wonderful thing to be able to have. But an education is not always going to be learned in a classroom. Much education is going to be learned through living life experiences, through traveling. Sometimes during the week, maybe you have to make a difference between sitting home and watching football on a Sunday and going out into your car and driving 45 miles outside of a town that's different than yours and eating at a restaurant that you normally wouldn't eat at and experiencing another person's culture for that moment. And that's the beauty of America. That's what we do have over other countries. Now, as far as saying we shouldn't riot, I'll tell you the difference in what the majority of media shows and what people talk about when it comes to rioting. And I think when we're talking about these riots, we're talking about the recent Baltimore riots. We're talking about riots in other areas where racial tension has reached a limit, where people have gone through and burnt down their own stores or stores within their area. But I want to ask you something. I look at the majority of those people, let's say it be the black community. Let's pick the black community that's rioting. Let's use Baltimore as a great example. And they go through and they tear apart their own village, their own hood, their own barrio that they live in. How many of those businesses are actually black owned and operated in that area? How many of those businesses have been supportive out of helping the black community out in that local area? Because I'll tell you, if you have a business like a Hudson's or a Marshall Fields, or you have a Macy's, or you have another store like that, they don't give a shit about you. It's not what they are going to do for you, because they're not going to do anything for you. It's what you are going to do for them. And so when they move into an impoverished area and give people lines of credit, of course you can buy Nike Air Jordans and anything else that they sell and anything else that you would want to wear, because that's what is important to the average person, is how you look when you go out in public. So burning your own city to the ground, I don't think the majority of those store owners, and I haven't heard from one of them that have come out and said anything about, oh, they feel so sad because their store went down, they were a business owner for 35 years, their deli was ruined, they can't sell clothes anymore, this and that. That's bullshit. It's places and it's corporate businesses who are actually willing and happy about their business burning down to the ground, because the same way that Larry Silverstein made money off of the World Trade Center coming down, they get paid from their insurance about their building coming down. And before they get paid, they go through and they take out of boxes and they take other things that haven't been put on the shelf, and they're happy. And if you want to know which business suffers and is sad about being burnt down, see which business rebuilds. Because they all have to be insured. There's somebody going around and making sure they're insured. It's not that you can run a Macy's. You ever heard of any corporate store that was out in any area that didn't have insurance? That's not the way things operate. That's not the way that things work. So yes, education, certainly important. Debt in life, also important. I'll tell you a personal story of when I was a 14-year-old kid. I was working at an American Legion. My aunt had run a fish fry there every weekend. And I remember this one guy, I forget exactly what his name was, it might have been Larry, something like that, but he came in, well-dressed man, extremely well-dressed. He used to buy people drinks, drove a new Cadillac every 2 years. I remember the last car that he had was this baby blue Cadillac that he had. We went on vacations, would come back with Polaroid photos, believe it or not, and it wasn't a new Polaroid camera for the hipsters, it was essentially an older one that he had filmed for, of trips that he had taken, Aruba, Jamaica, cruise lines. He had gone out to Florida. You know, if you didn't see him Friday at the American Legion, he was essentially out on vacation somewhere on a trip, visiting somebody or seeing a new part of the world and taking photos with a new girlfriend or his old girlfriend or one of his many girlfriends at the time. Always well dressed, always well put together, always had good fashion, especially for an older person. One weekend I come in, and the bartender that I knew at the bar comes in and says, hey, we're taking donations. And I said, really? I said, donations for what? And she said, well, Larry's funeral. I said, the guy, that drives the, oh yeah, she goes, that guy that comes around here. And I said, well, what happened? Well, he passed away on Wednesday, and his son came, up from Cleveland, Ohio, came to visit, and we're taking donations. I think the amount at the time was around $750 to $800 for his cremation. You see, because Larry did the thing that majority of us would do if we still could do. He took out loans and he lived on credit, and there wasn't even enough money to melt his ass down when he passed. The same bar that he went through and probably within a month or two bought drinks for other people and gave people tips and went through and of course had a new car every 2 years and drove there and took vacations and regaled people with the stories of people that he had met in other parts of the world. That same Larry didn't have enough money to bury his own ass. That same Larry didn't own his house. That same Larry worked, as a lot of people worked. And what it tells me is that this is not a new problem. This is an ongoing problem. This is a problem that's been going. It's a new problem for us because, of course, we're coming into it. We're getting older, and now it becomes a new problem for us. So once again, let's unite and not make a division between race, class, or even religion. Getting back to the religion thing, I'm going to argue, and just today actually it came out, September 11th, wonderful that this news has come out. It's actually 2 broadcasts I'm doing today, that the head of Al-Qaeda just basically stated that he wants to go to all-out war against the head of ISIS. Now see, in America we don't differentiate the two because we like to think that every Arab that's living over there, that has nothing to do with us. Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, sure, they were great friends. Let me tell you something. Saddam Hussein would have wiped out bin Laden as soon as he possibly could because he was another underling who was highly funded that could have thrown Saddam Hussein out of power. And it's by the same token that these people are against each other. So now, it's not as clear as a wrestling match where there's a good guy and there's a bad guy, there's an enemy and there's a good person. Because quite honestly, in that realm, we're all shitty people. We're all shitty people. All of us. Within that realm, when ISIS is against Al-Qaeda, and we want to help one take out the other, who do we help? How do we make that decision? And before you scoff at that idea, I just want you to keep in mind that we put Saddam Hussein in power to go against the Ayatollah. We also put Gaddafi in power by the same thing. And we also, I think, put bin Laden in power. Matter of fact, bin Laden, a lot of the video footage that you see of him running around in the mountains of Afghanistan and Pakistan, he's actually wearing the same jacket that soldiers gave him at Fort Bragg. Saddam Hussein was at Lackland Air Force Base. That's one of the places he was learning to speak English. So when I was in the Air Force and I was during basic training, and in one of the barracks, 4 barracks away, and down one of the main strips down there, whatever the name of it was, you don't, really have time to look left and right at what the street's called when you are marching and looking forward. That's where Saddam Hussein learned to speak English. So here's a bigger question to the American government, to the American people. And this goes right along with education as well. Why is it that all of these leaders that are our friends, that are empowered by us, that we throw money at, that we give incentives to, why is it that 5, 10, 15 years after they were on our side, all of a sudden they turn? I mean, it seems like we've given them a good deal. We've given them weapons. We've given them support, be it with food, be it with artillery, be it with anything that they would demand at that time because we look at us ourselves as having a greater enemy out there. Why is that? Excuse me. And why is it that every single one of them come back after 10 or 15 years and they are at that point the terrorists? They are people that we have to go after. What are we doing wrong? Empowering those and not having the foresight of being able to see that they are brutes. What are we doing wrong? Another Nietzsche quote. I know I started the beginning of this broadcast with a Nietzsche quote, and I'm going to bring this up again, and it's a different quote of his. And what he stated was, when dealing with monsters, one should be extremely careful not he himself to become a monster. And when you stare out into the great abyss, keep in mind that the great abyss also stares deeply within you. So going back to education, I absolutely think that it is important to get an education. But we should be clear about what an education is. An education should not be confined to a classroom And an education should not be confined to papers that are written for a professor, be they liberal or conservative, and to their standards at each time. Because instructors like that teach no more than people to follow into a certain line. Education should also not be detrimental to a family's future. You should not have to go to college and then, with going to college, worry about securing employment, having a decent job, and being able to provide for your kids better than you had in life. As always on our broadcast, I cherish the idea and the fact that it is open to the public and that people can write me personally. If there is something that I've misspoken about, if there's facts that I've spoken about that are untrue, I am open to people writing back, commenting on them, and I will get to them. And I will actually publicly apologize if there's something that's written here that's not true. I'm no more right than any other broadcaster that you see on TV. But what I also am not is bought, and I also don't come in with any other agenda than what I see going on around me. That's my agenda. My agenda isn't that I want you to think the way that I think. I would like for you to look at and listen to what I talk about and go and research it on your own. It's not so much here of creating solutions as much as it is raising questions and having other people do research to think for themselves. That's our show for the night. Thank you for joining us.